Welcome to 60 minutes of unscripted .NET entertainment. Our mission is to empower the .NET community to achieve more. I'm your host, David Pine, with co-hosts Maira Menzel and Frank Boucher. And I'm very pleased today to welcome our special guest, Egil Hansen, who is going to be sharing some amazing tech with us as it relates to Blazor. You may know him from B Unit, but Egil, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the world?
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm happy you said unscripted, David, because this is very much me going out on a limb here. Well, who am I? I am actually, if you pop up my slides, I have all the information here. So yes, I'm Egil Hansen, and you can find me on these socials here on Mastodon and on Twitter, and I'm on GitHub. I work for a Danish company called Delegate, sort of IT consultant, Microsoft-focused company, and I became a Microsoft MVP because I built a few open source libraries, BUnit and AngleSharp, and maybe I'm getting myself mixed up in another one. We'll see by the end of the stream. So yeah, that's me. Should I just dive straight in, or do you want to
do it? No, that's perfect.
Things?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I don't want to. If you had a specific order of things, let's. Okay. Well,
no, perfect.
So, I've been curious about Htmx for a while. So I remember back in around the time when Blazor with .NET 8 was released, and we got Blazor static server-side rendered Blazor. Somebody tweeted about maybe that's a good mix with Htmx, and I leaned back and said, well, why? We have enhanced navigations, we have all these nice things that come out of the box. What does Htmx bring to the table? And I wasn't really educated, so I was pretty skeptic about the whole notion of combining those two. And then I started looking a bit more into it, and I found a bunch of stuff from, I'm going to butcher his name, Khalid from JetBrains. He's been talking a lot about that and doing a lot of work in that area. And he sort of got me, hooked onto the idea. And so this is what came out of that, that I'll be sharing with you guys today. So, but before we get to that, I want to sort of talk a bit about the render modes. And I know at least you, David, you've written the book on, well, not the book, you've written a book
Yes.
on Blazor. So you might be able to contribute here. So I want to sort of list the pros and cons about the different render modes at a fairly high level, just to see where we can actually maybe do some work with Htmx to make Blazor even better.
Before we go, can we explain what Htmx is?
Yes, but if you allow me to, I'll do that on the next slide.
Okay.
Yes.
I thought it was important. So if you're covering it in the next slide, that's perfect. Then.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I want to say, I kind of assume most people here understand a Blazor or no Blazor. This is a Microsoft-centric podcast, so hopefully people know what Blazor is. But let's just go through what the pros and cons are for the different types of render modes that we have in .NET 8 Blazor. And then I'll add HTMX on top of that. And so thank you, Frank, for keeping me honest here. So for me, at least, the pros of Blazor, the static server-side rendered thing, where you don't get really any interactivity, but you have some advantages. You have stateless, right? So whenever you deal with state, you have, that's complexity. You can see that by looking at the various UI libraries, React, Blazor, and Vue, and all of those. When you have more complex apps, you start looking for state management patterns like Flux or things like that. So that's definitely some complexity with state. The advantage with server-side rendered is that you get a request, you generate your markup, and you return that back to the user, and there's no state to be maintained between requests. You have to basically redo the whole thing from the start. Because you're on the server, you have direct access to the server resources like databases and other things you want to pull out there. It's a small payload. You're generally just passing down a little bit of JavaScript that manages some of the Blazor functionality, but it's very small, so it's a fast thing. And it's super cacheable because you're just returning static content, right? So you can leverage all the advantages you have of HTTP over the wire, stuff like that. And then Blazor adds a bit on top of that. You get sort of enhanced navigation, so you don't have a full refresh, but it'll sort of do an HTTP fetch for you in the background instead of doing a full page navigation. And you also get that with forms under the right circumstances. And then we also have streaming rendering, which I didn't add to this list. Actually, I forgot that. Now, some of the cons is that, well, whenever you want to do something on the UI, you have to do a round trip to the server and pull out the data, right? And well, it's also a con that it's stateless. It removes, you basically have to build up the full state on every request, and then you pass that back. So I'm that sort of, this is at least my pros cons list here. Please jump in if chat or David or other people have any things you think I'm missing here. But yeah, no, for Blazor server. So that's the Blazor server is the thing where you have that stateful connection. You have a signal, you have a Blazor server on the server, and then you have a client script in the browser, and there's a stateful connection between the two, and you have all the state, you have direct access to the server resources, you have a small payload as well. And it's very efficient in terms of updating the UI. It'll only send the small diffs down to the client, so it basically is able to patch in the parts of the UI that has changed. But the con side is that, yeah, you do require that active connection to the server. You need to maintain the state on the server. So there's some scalability concerns there. Can also be latency and interactions. Like if you click a button in a Blazor server application, if the Blazor server is on the other side of the earth, that click has to travel around the globe and then back again with the response. So there's, speed of light and all those, limitations there. It's not really offline capable. So that's more compared to our friend over in Blazor WebAssembly land that is able to do that. It's also stateful, which is both a pro and a con, because state is hard, right? It's a complexity you add to your solution. Now, on the Blazor WASM side, well, we have stateful. We have it runs directly on the client and gives you access to all the things. You can also have a more reactive UI in that when you click a button, you can actually go and do things. You can disable the button if you don't want people to continue clicking it while they're waiting for your API call to go through. It's offline capable. I ran out of well, there's many good reasons to use Blazor WebAssembly, but add your own pros and cons here as well. One thing that is a clear cons compared to the two others is that you have to actually create an API as well besides your WebAssembly application, because you have to get the data from somewhere, right? And the payload is bigger because it's full .NET and everything you pull down, and it's stateful, which is also a downside. Now,
but can I add one?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So for Blazor WebAssembly, one of the pros that's not listed here is you have a much more optimal JavaScript interop because it's all client side. So the interoperability can actually be synchronous rather than asynchronous, and there's no network IO calls. So it's a lot more efficient.
Absolutely. I will definitely add that to my slide deck for the next time, if there's a next time. Thank you, David.
Yep.
Now, so my goal was to see if I can bring Blazor static server-side rendering closer to Blazor server and capabilities. So there is some functionality there. We kind of want all the cons and all the pros on the static server-side rendered, but also the advantages of Blazor server. So Htmx doesn't really add anything in terms of the client-side thing. If you're using Blazor WebAssembly, you're probably not going to want to leverage WebAssembly because you're already in the client. That's not going to be an advantage for you there. But so that's sort of where I started. I was saying, well, I can see a lot of benefits here if we can up the Blazor static server-side rendered game even further. So that's what I'm trying to do with this. Now, here is the answer to your question, Frank. What is Htmx? So I've copy-pasted this small snippet from their website. So Htmx gives you access to Ajax, CSS transitions, WebSocket, and server-side events directly in HTML using attributes. So you can bring modern user interfaces with the simplicity and power of your hypertext. So I've highlighted what I think is the most critical thing, and that's the directly in HTML using attributes. So what does that actually mean? So that means you can declare what your intentions are in your code. So it's a bit like you basically supercharge the capabilities of HTML in the browser and the browser's understanding of that. So you can do a lot of things that normally require a little bit of extra JavaScript. And if that doesn't fit well with Blazor's goal, right, then I don't know what does. So Blazor is all about, we don't want to write JavaScript, we want to write more C# and maybe have a little bit of JavaScript here and there. And that's basically what Htmx is also providing, but just on the client. So you get a lot more functionality without having to have to write a bunch of JavaScript. Now, HTMX is built on the REST principles. So if anybody have ever read, Roy Fielding's dissertation on RESTful architectures, you will know that this is all about using the HTTP protocol, using the various verbs we have there, get, put, post, delete, and all of that to communicate what you're doing, access resources using the URLs, using status code to communicate success, failures, and what have you, using headers to, enhance the communication and intentions. So that is basically what Htmx is also doing. It's adding more actions that we can perform directly in the browser and using those to communicate back to the server what we intend to do. And it's stateless in a sense that you don't have state you maintain on the server, but you have the state directly in HTML. So if you have a form, you will have your form fields, that will be the state. Now, if the server restarts and comes back online and you hit F5, you don't hit F5, but if you're debugging, you do. But if you want to send data to the server, like you're not going to lose that signal R connection you have with the server, and then you will have that grayed out screen with lost connection to the server. Click here to reload, which is probably also a cons on the Blazor server side of the table, right? So you don't lose that. Like the state is all in the browser, and if the server restarts or redeploys, which is something you do once in a while, the user will just still be able to submit the form, and the form will travel to the server, and the server will say, well, hey, here's a form, let me handle that. Doesn't need to know that it actually rendered that form before, as long as it still matches what it thinks should be in a form that it received, right? So the state is traveling with the client, which is nice. It's backend agnostic. So Htmx have no opinion about what endpoints you want to talk to, what library generated your code. So, and it's a very small JavaScript library you just add into your page. It has no dependencies, and it's quite extensible. So you're able to do quite a bit with it. So that's sort of my take on Htmx. I want to preface this by saying I'm not an Htmx expert at all. So other people might be able to cover this better. You can definitely go and find video tutorials from Khalid, which I mentioned before, on YouTube, where he talks much more about this. Now, if there is any questions that come up in chat, I'm not able to multitask that much and both speak and follow chat along. So just interrupt me anytime you have anything.
We'll be sure to do that. Don't worry.
Good. All right. So let me show an example of what I mean by this. So here you have sort of a search form that you might have on on your website. And if you want to sort of have the active search thing where you type a little bit, and when you pause, it sends a request back to the backend, and then patches in your stuff. This is basically what you would do. And here you can see the declarative nature of Htmx, where you have these special HX attributes. So what we are saying here is we have a page, and I've only included some of it, but you have sort of a search thing. You have an indicator thing that we want to show when it's actually doing a communication to the backend, so it'll start spin and do its thing. So what we have here is we say, well, so the action is to do a post to the search endpoint. And the trigger is that when users type like on input, and when the input has changed, and here we actually say, well, you can sort of chain them together. As you can see, you can sort of try to clear it to say, well, on input, if there is a change, so if you just go A and then delete an A again, then it's not a change, right? And then you say, we want to have, if there's been a change within the last 500 milliseconds, well, then you go and trigger the HTTP post. The target of the result that you get from doing my query to the backend should be put into this div box down here, the search results. And oh, by the way, when there's a request ongoing, go and make this element with an Htmx indicator on, make that visible to the user, so you can basically show a spinner, so you sort of indicate to the user that things going on. You can also do other things like have an HX disable element. So for example, if you have a form you want to submit that takes a while to process on the backend, you don't want people to double click on that. So as soon as that button is clicked, Htmx will go in and disable the button, then send the request on, and when the response comes back, it will do things again. So you have that quick interaction. It doesn't have to travel around the world, figure out, oh, I need to disable the button, go back, disable the button, and then back and forth. So you don't have that slow interaction you can get with Blazor server if you're far enough away from the server. So you have that immediate impact on the DOM, and then you do things. Now, So what happens? Well, when Htmx decides to push a request, well, it'll do an HTTP post to the search endpoint. It will include the parameter, in this case, the input that was put into the input box in the headers, or in the body, and then it'll have headers, and then the server can just produce the fragment that needs to be placed back into the result. It doesn't have to produce the full body of the page. It can just produce whatever it needs to patch into, and then when the response comes back, Htmx will look at the hx target and say, well, okay, I need to put the results into the results div here. So that's sort of how you get that efficient interactivity. Yeah. So, and by the way, if you want to see more examples, you can go to htmx.org and go under the examples things. They have a bunch of different examples and use cases where they show off different ways of doing this. Now, so now you might be wondering, when can I get some HTMX in my .NET applications? And there's a few existing libraries out there. Actually, if you go and search for HTMX on NuGet, you will find, I think, was it 23 different packages. So other people besides me have had the idea that this might be a good thing to combine. So I think the primary one right now is the htmx.net package from Khalid. And it enables you to do HTMX quite nicely if you're doing Razor pages and in ASP.NET Core. Then there's Giraffe HTMX. So in F# land, you have Giraffe, which is a web application framework. And there, Daniel has created an HTMX extension for that, so that you're able to use HTMX natively with that. Then there's another F# example, Fun HTMX, which is a mix of Blazor and F#, where they have a custom template language for generating the Blazor components. So instead of writing markup, and there's other things there. So it's also an interesting take. Then there's a fairly new one to the scene, Risi, I think, by Michael. And it's basically taking Blazor and trying to combine Blazor with HTMX through various means. Now, yesterday, or no, actually last Friday, I tweeted out and saying, well, I'm coming on here, and what are people's experiences with HTMX and Blazor together? And of course, Khalid was kind enough to respond. And we had a small discussion on Mastodon about that, but he basically listed a bunch of pros and cons about using Blazor and HTMX together. So not Razor pages. Razor pages, he's more or less covered very well with this library, but Blazor and HTMX is sort of a new kid in town. And he says that, so Blazor's DOM state management versus HTMX state management, they can come and they can fight a bit, because they're both basically manipulating the DOM. So you want to make sure that you can control those and not have them stomp on each other. He also highlights that Blazor doesn't really have the same abilities as Razor Pages has in terms of using tag helpers, which is another package that he's developed that enables some of the HTMX specific attributes, make them easier to work with when you're using Razor Pages. Then routing if you're just using Blazor straight out of the box, if you want to add custom endpoints, and you can imagine that you have a component that works basically, that will render your full page, a normal thing, but then you want to, with HTMX, you want to just have the small subcomponent actually being returned. So you need to expose that subcomponent on a URL somehow, and you would do that with there's a new way of doing that in .NET 8 through Minimal API, but you basically have to do the routing yourself. And another thing that's big in HTMX is its ability to deal with HTMX, or rather it leverages HTTP response codes and headers to, rather you as the server developer leverages those, so you're able to control what HTMX does with the markup you return to them. And Blazor is quite unaware of anything. That's not a built-in way of sort of saying, well, return this markup, but also set these headers and return with this status code instead of the normal 200 status code. So some of those things are not really built into Blazor out of the box. And yeah, they can be sort of fighting each other, HTMX and Blazor. So all of these things were really great points, and I just stole them completely from, you can go and read about it on this tiny URL I've created here, where basically he sums up the pros and cons. So this is sort of what I want to do with a new library I'm experimenting with, and I've called it HTML. I haven't decided how to say this. Htmxer, I think, is probably going to be the thing. So yeah, well, so the first thing you do when you want to do a new open source library is you create a cool, icon for it, right? And then you figure out the rest afterwards. So that's basically where we're at, almost. So the goal is basically to make Blazor understand HTMX on a render level. So we want to have the core renderer be aware of HTMX attributes. Some of them have different meanings, and we might want to treat them differently. We want to have custom event handlers that we can use in our Blazor markup, like onPost, onPut. I also want to enable so you can use onClick and all of those that you can't really use. You can't use the onClick event handlers on DoubleClick and all of that in Blazor because they are not supported in Blazor static server-side rendered, right? You have to do forms, right, to do anything there. I want to be able to also support template fragments. So template fragments is basically a way, and there's a link that sort of describes what they are, but the idea is you have maybe a full page, but then sometimes you just want to render this small portion of that page. And instead of having to refactor that small portion into a separate component, sometimes it will be easier just to say, well, on this particular request, just render this this part of the markup and not the full markup, right? So that's sort of a fragment of the response you want to have in there. I want to be able to say, well, I want to declare that this page should be directly routable, so I don't have to create custom API endpoints in my Blazor application. It should just work like any other Blazor application. So it basically should be seamless. Like there shouldn't be any obvious things, and we should be able to support more than just get and post, which Blazor supports out of the box. Put, post, patch, and delete, I believe. And we should be able to control response headers. And basically, it should also integrate with standard services like Navigation Manager and the edit form components, things like that. So it feels like you're basically creating a Blazor application with HTMX on top of it. And yeah, so this is the URL. It's super experimental right now. It's kind of on the stage where it works on my machine, but that's basically where we're at right now. So I thought it would be fun if there's not any questions or things that pop up. I can show a quick demo. Maybe.
Well, we do have questions. There's definitely questions.
Yes, go ahead. Fire them all.
All right, I'll take the first one here. This is from earlier, so we're playing catch up on some of these. We wanted to make sure you had your presentation going. So from Facebook or Meta, can you compare Blazor server with Next.js? How does Blazor overcome the other, maybe?
And I think like at answering that question. Go ahead.
And I think I was gonna say like we typically don't like to say like, oh, this one is better than this. Is more like what do you get from one versus the other, or it's like what is in your workflow that makes sense to use this one. Like I don't know, like I feel like saying, oh, don't use Next.js or something. So, but David, I think you're the best person to answer this.
Oh, I'll go ahead.
Okay, so for me, it's not about which is better, right? But they are comparable in a sense where, if I understand this correctly, but Next.js is basically moving React to the server. So you basically get server-side rendered React, and then you send that down to the client. Oh, I'm hearing myself again. There's an echo.
I hear that too.
Okay, and I think it's gone. Awesome. Sorry. Yeah. So in that sense, Blazor server-side rendered is the same as Next.js, or they're trying to do the same thing. They're trying to move away from some of the complexity of having a stateful client-side application and just having server-side rendered pages returning back to the client. And if you want to go with Blazor static server-side rendered versus Next.js, it's more about what ecosystem you're comfortable with.
Okay, and the next one, can Blazor dynamically render layouts? It's the only problem I'm facing currently working with Htmx and Blazor.
Dynamically render layouts. I think so. Well, so typically in Blazor, you declare what is the layout for an individual component that you want to apply there. that's actually something I have built into Htmxer, is the ability to say, well, for normal requests, like for regular old full load the whole thing requests, you can use this main layout, the typical one you use. But for my HTMX requests on this particular component, use this layout instead. So you can have different layouts depending on whether or not you're dealing with an HTMX request or a normal, just full page load request. In Blazor, you do declare what layout type you want using the add layout attribute on your component, and which is statically compiled. But you can do dynamic routing and sort of go in multiple different directions if you want, I think. So, but it's not dynamic in a sense that it's just built in. You have to do a little bit of legwork.
Awesome. And then the next one is, can the response be JSON data instead? And I think this is referring specifically to how HTMX expects HTML to be.
So in general, yeah, there is extensions to HTMX where you can say, well, instead of getting HTML back, you can just query something and you get JSON. And then there's a client-side templating support in HTMX where you can say, well, translate this JSON into markup. But in general, we are leveraging the basic HTTP protocol here. So if you have a client-side library that calls the server and says, my accept header says, I want HTML back, then the server can respond with HTML. If you have a server that can both do HTML and JSON or XML and other things, if they will look at the accept header in the HTTP call and decide which one to return to you. So there's nothing specific, but for HTMX, I think it's mostly used just with HTML, but you can certainly integrate with other things as well.
Awesome. And then
there was one from Jose before where he says, like, I know he answered on the comments, but I wanted to also put it as part of the show, which is which features do browsers need to have to be able to use HTML? I look for HTMX one can I use, and I couldn't find it. So it's to be able to use HTMX, not HTML.
So as you can see here, it's actually IE11 compatible HTMX. So it will work on your grandmother's old telephone that's lying in the drawer back home. HTMX is and for HTMX version 2, which is in beta right now, they're gonna drop IE11 support, but there's nothing really required, right? It's very much a plug and play thing. So yeah, I'm not worried about compatibility. You won't find HTMX on can I use, but yeah, no, it's well documented. I highly recommend just reading through the main documentation pages here, and it explains it very well. So
yeah, I responded to them actually. It's more or less just at a high level. You reference a small JavaScript file, right, and a script tag, and then it's just declarative with attributes, and then you're off to the races.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
did we?
I think there's one more. I'll put it up real quick. Fusnabel from Twitch is asking, can the response replace the request source?
I'm not sure I understand, but
yeah, I think it was when you were showing your demo. I think like the tag, the tags.
Can the response? So there is some response headers you can pass down when you return a response from your server to the HTMX library. You can basically override some of the things that are built in there. So you can say, well, instead of putting this markup in here, you can put it somewhere else. So in that way, the server has a lot of control. I hope that might answer that. Otherwise, ping me on the socials afterwards and we can discuss further.
But it was mostly that there was like a complimentary message, and he was asking like, oh, so you can refactor so the page on the fly and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it was
yes, I think that's possible, but I would need to know more.
That's all the question.
Frank, I think it's when you are unmuted that I hear myself again. I don't know if you have anything going on there.
Yeah, I think it's you, Frank.
Definitely Frank. Definitely.
I don't want to hang you out.
We've tested all the combinations now. Sorry. It's live, folks. It's live.
Unscripted.
It's very much live. Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to try to build HTMXer and try to see what it could do. And I wanted to do a sort of a demo app to see where the pain points are. And I remembered that the Microsoft folks had created a workshop called Blazing Pizza Workshop. Some of you might have seen this before. And it's very much a Blazor server thing, right? So it's highly interactive. So I wanted to sort of do that. And let me start by showing you how it works in Blazor server. So here you basically have a pizza shop and you want this interactivity where you can say, well, I want this pizza and I want this size. So you scroll and you see the price update. You want to add a few different things and you can sort of do this very interactive thing where you sort of, it's very back and forth. There's very active UI going on here. You hit the order button, it gets added over here. And oh, I also want some buffalo chicken, maybe not a big one. Oh, that might be a weird combo. So sort of this is how the Blazor version works. Now, obviously you have to log in first, so to order. So let me do that. blazingpizza.com. Secret. So yeah, you choose something you want. Let's see, click order, and then you have your form, street, city, and some postal code, and then does. Oh, hang on, this is actually, oh, my bad. This is the Htmx version I'm showing you right now. So,
oops.
Yeah. Okay. No,
it works great.
It works great. So that's maybe the point. Okay. Let's go with that was on purpose. So this is the Blazor server version, and you can see it works the same. You can choose to add some toppings. You can click the order button, and oh, I had to log in here as well. Okay. So you get the point. It's more or less the same, and you're able to do the same. Well, to some extent. Now, the big difference is whenever I click around here and do a thing, it'll do a refresh here. So if I, start ordering something and say, well, let's add this to the DOM, and I go and kill my server, and now Blazor would be throwing up a black screen, and then I start it up again. But, everything still continues to work here. And I can go ahead and click order, and so you don't get that statelessness that you might otherwise have. So how does this work? Well, let me pop up the developer tools and let me see if I can zoom in on them. I can. Excellent. And we probably want them to be on the side so it's easier to follow along. So this might mess up the pretty UI a bit, but at least we can see what's going on. So now I have it filtered to just show me documents and fetch HXR requests. So let's start with refreshing and ignore these. This is a browser link from Visual Studio, so we don't care about those. But this was just a normal full page load where you do a request and to the get, and you get a response back with a bunch of things here, 200 OK, and you get the full response. You can see it's a full HTML document that gets returned to us. So if I click here now, what it actually does is it calls a new endpoint on the a new endpoint that's located on the configure pizza with an ID of the special, so the pizza special I wanted here. And the response we get back is a bunch of different things, but more importantly, we just get the modal dialog that pops up here. Now, whenever I do something like this, drag this, well, we need to go back to the server and recalculate the price. So basically, that's a full request to the server again, but where we use HTTP put instead because we are just updating the form. If we add something, you can see there's another one that comes in. But all the state is sort of stored here in the markup. We can have a look real quick here in the response. Let's see if I can make this work at all for you guys. So here we have the size input. Where is that? The input field. there we go. So this is the size, and you can see its value is set to 14, which is what we have up here. So the state of the form is stored in the input section, and then you have down here, I have some hidden input fields for all the things that are currently selected. So again, you're tracking the state in the markup. So that means you're sending more data back and forth between the client and the server. But you also don't have any state you need to manage on the server, right? It's stateless on the server side of things. So that's basically this thing. Then you can click there and say order. Well, that means, again, we are posting back to the root. We're posting back to, well, I can't see that here, but if you go to headers, you can see we do a post back to the root index again, and with a post, because that's now we're posting the full form. And what do we get back? Well, let's go to response. We get an update to the sidebar here, which we then patch in. So all these things stay the same. Like, we don't touch this, but we just update this sidebar here. And if you want to go ahead and click order, well, now we're actually going to a new URL. We're going to /checkout. And you can also see the URL updated up here. And now we have a form, and we have the normal validation with edit form that you normally get. But when you try to click place order, you will see that the response we got back was a post, but then it also included the validation errors that we had in here. So you get that interactivity, and you're just updating the parts of the page that you want to, and everything sort of still works. And the whole UI, the built-in account system, the standalone account management system that comes with Blazor out of the box, those pages I just dropped in. I didn't really do anything to make them Htmx aware, right? They just work out of the box. Now, so what does it require to actually do this? And do interrupt me if there's any questions along the way or comments.
Yeah, there are some more questions coming in. Should we get to those now, you think?
Yeah, might as well.
So there was an earlier question I'll put up. So how does Htmx implementation in Blazor react to exceptions? Like, for example, an endpoint not found or timeouts, etc. So
if you're returning, so it's all documented. I can't remember all the basics, but if you return, for example, a 200, it'll try to patch in the data. If you return a 400, it'll do a different thing. 500 will do a different thing and you can even go and configure that in your settings for Htmx, saying, well, what should it do? So you can, for example, if you want to do real proper RESTful behavior, you can say, I'm going to return a 417, I believe, for unprocessable entity if you have a validation error in your post, and then you return that back, plus the HTML that has the validation errors in it. And so then you're clearly signaling to the client, this is a validation error, but you can tell Htmx to still take that and patch it into the DOM and say, well, so users can see that as well. So it's highly configurable in that way.
Awesome. They were asking also for a repo to look at the code. Yes. I did share that one. I think that was the Htmx or.
So this, I don't know if I can post links, but I can try.
That is the link I shared. Okay, I did share that link.
Oh yeah.
Perfect.
And then there's htmx.org. But yeah, if you search for htmx on, yeah, you got that already. All right,
yep,
awesome.
That's already shared. Perfect. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Right. And then the next one. But so how does this work with like arguments for my Razor components? Do I need to check value set in the DOM? Go ahead.
That's a question that sets me up for what I was going to show here.
Perfect.
So the first thing, if you just do a file new Blazor static server project, so that would be new project, and you choose Blazor web app, and then you say, sure, why not? And you say, well, you can add user again, but here you want to not choose any of these guys. You just want to do non-interactive mode, because Htmx is going to be our interaction, right? And you can do, well, this doesn't really matter in this case, right? So that's sort of the starting point you have. Now, what you need to do if you download the alphabets of Htmx, so you need to call add Htmx after add Razor components, then you call add Htmx there. And then this is from the Blazing Pizza demo app. So here you also have all the authentication set up, and you have the databases. All of this is just standard. This is not HTMX specific. And all of these things is also, the solution. The next thing you want to do is you want to say, you want to call on map razor components. After that, you call add HTMX component endpoints as well, and you pass in the app type. And you also want to add use HTMX anti-forgery. So I'm trying to leverage the built-in anti-forgery logic that is in ASP.NET Core and been around for a long time to prevent cross-site scripting attacks and things like that, cross-site request forgery attacks. So that's one of the concerns that people have voiced about HTMX in general, is that it enables you to just do an HTTP delete to an endpoint. And if the endpoint doesn't check that it's supposed to receive that request, you can just override that. So, but anti-forgery and all of those functionalities has been built into ASP.NET Core for a long time. So we're just leveraging them here to protect our endpoints, so we know that they're actually coming from from a source we intended them to come from.
So out of curiosity then, is that like opaque to the developer so they don't have to do anything special? Okay.
That's the goal. And yeah, so it basically works, and maybe this method call will go away in a future release, so that it just works. Trademark, all of that.
Awesome.
But so that's the first step. And then you can go and have a look at the app. And I'm using the Blazing Pizza demo here. But then the app level, well, what you need to do is, this is just commented out. Well, here I have some Bootstrap. So it works, HTMX works great with client-side libraries like Bootstrap that also comes with components you can just plug in, right? So I've used those for the Blazing Pizza app. But other than that, you need to add the HTMX head outlet component, which will automatically, or you can configure that, but automatically include the version of HTMX that it's supposed to work with, and a few other extensions. Then you might notice that we don't have any blazor.web.js files down here. That's because one of the points Khalid had was that they can sort of fight each other. So I just threw that out. So in general, when I started this project, I started by basically downloading the ASP.NET Core library from GitHub, and like a good old car mechanic, I started just pulling things out until I sort of understood what was going on. So there's some features that are still left on the floor. I haven't plugged in again. Like one thing that is definitely not working right now is streaming server-side rendering. There is a built-in way of HTMX of doing that, where you can basically say, when this loads, call this and start loading the long-running, the slow thing. So, but it would be nice also to get support for some of those things. But anyway, we've basically pulled out the Blazor client-side bits, and instead we had this. So HX Boost is HTMX's version of enhanced navigation, enhanced forms. So we'll basically do, and you can sort of see that as an example here. So these two here are just regular old links. Like these, this is just a div that points to my orders, and then you have a div that points to pizzas. And when I click back and forth here, you still have that smooth, no update thing going on. But what HTMX is doing, because we have that HX Boost on the, let me see if I can zoom ever so slightly more in here on the body, then it still does basically what Blazor server does with the enhanced navigation, where it uses HTTP fetch, or the fetch JavaScript bit, and then calls and then patches things in for you. So that's basically, with this attribute here, you basically more or less get the same as you had with the Blazor client-side JavaScript bits, enhanced navigation, and enhanced forms. So that is sort of the setup that you need to do. Now, if we go to the index page and have a look a bit, you will see, let me collapse things ever so slightly more. So here we have the specials. So those would be these 8 pizzas here. So those are printed out as a div box. And besides some CSS to make them look pretty, you have an HX get that is targeting configure pizza with the special ID. You have a trigger saying, well, you want to trigger on click The Htmx supports all kinds of things. You can also do modify saying only when you hit control and click at the same time. So there's a bunch of different combinations you can do, also double click and all sorts of weird combinations you can do. You want to put the content into the configure dialog box. And here you can see the integration between, well, you can just leverage Bootstrap as well. So Bootstrap had their own attributes here called data BS toggle model, and also which models you target. So this will actually trigger, so when I click one of these buttons, what will happen is that Bootstrap's JavaScript will pick up on that and say, well, okay, that's a toggle for me to open the modal. So we do that. At the same time, Htmx in the background is doing a request to the configure pizza endpoint and pulling data out and putting that into the modal. So it gets as seamless like that. So you can sort of combine the two of the multiple different UI libraries together. And then you have some calculations of everything. Now, I think it's more interesting now to have a quick look at the configure pizza endpoint. So if we go down here and find configure pizza dialog, this is the configure pizza dialog box. So you will see here, this is the one that gets called by Htmx. And it just sits, you just annotate that with a configure pizza, just normal page attribute. If you don't want this to be routable in a non-HTMX fashion, so in theory, I could actually go in here and say configure pizza, and I hit an exception page because I didn't provide what I needed. I guess I need to do
query string
special ID special. Well, spelling is hard. Let me just make sure I get that right. Here we go. Special ID equal 1. So now I just get this little bit back. So if you don't want that to happen, right? If you don't want your HTMX specific endpoints to be browsable directly in the browser or without the right headers, well, then you can go and instead of doing this, you can do an add attribute and add an hx route, which then would take the same route configuration here. So that's sort of a way that is built into HTMX to sort of describe the additional routes you want. But for the most part, like I've sort of realized that it doesn't really matter that people can navigate to your HTMX specific endpoints because they can get the content anyway by just clicking in the browser. So it's not that you're exposing secrets by having additional endpoints that is exposed. So that's not really a security, but it might be something you want to do. Now, here you can see that when people go to this endpoint, we just have the modal dialog, with all the bells and whistles from Bootstrap, and we have some content in here. We have our input, and here you can see, for example, the size input. So I click this one, and I want to change the size. What we also want, when the size changes, we wanted to do a check back with the server and say, well, I changed the size. What is the new price? So you can again nest in here and say, well, if you have a size change, you go to the same URL. The target is still going to be the same. You want to swap the outer HTML, and the size will be part of that. Other things similar, you have the dropdown where you also have some postbacks going on. Now, if we scroll all the way down, so there was a question, how do we get the data, right? So here you can define, well, I want to get the query parameter special ID. So you just define that as you would normally in Blazor static server-side rendered. If you want to get the form data back, so there's a configure pizza form data attribute, which is going to receive all the form data that gets posted back to you. So you have the size is going to be defined in here. If we go have a look here, you can see we have the size, we have the special, we have the list of toppings that gets included. So all of that is, all those information is stored in, you can see I've stored the size, the toppings you've chosen. I've stored that as a hidden input field in the DOM. So we return that. So when something in here, hx put or one of the other things that trigger an interaction with the server, they will automatically include all the form fields that is within the same form when they do a post to the server or put to the server or whatever we do. Similarly, if you have, so when you go and add a topping like this, there's a small delete button here. and you click that, and that will also remove that. So all of that, you just store the information in the DOM, and then you get HTMX will send that back with its requests, and all of that gets added into the standard form mapping that we have in Blazor. So on initialize, when you receive that, you start by newing up your configure pizza dialog, or rather your form data, if it's not already instantiated by a request to the form. And then you have to go and load some specials and some toppings from the backend. You have to enrich your basically your pizzas, your pizza, your object with the various few things. And then if you call add topping, so this is a thing that we've enabled here. Let's see if we can find that add topping. So for example, here with the select dropdown, so we have an htags put, but then we also added this custom attribute called onput. And that basically means that when we have a request here where we select something, that onput method gets called down here after the uninitialize gets called. So similar to what you would have with normal triggers. And it's not enabled right now, but I see a way forward where we can also have something like on click, which normally doesn't work with Blazor static server-side rendered. Or it could be on, there's a whole bunch of different things, double click and all of that. So those type of events are supported by Htmx, so you can configure those up. So I see a way where you can use the Blazor annotation to say, I want to have my trigger should not be on click, which is the default. It should be on double click or on change or something. And then you would generate a specific Htmx mark attribute for that. And then you would still get that callback back on your server. So that is sort of a good demonstration of how you can combine these things and hook them up together.
Yeah, so there was a bit of chatter I was trying to process here. So some of the folks are saying that they have to admit that, like at a cursory look, the Htmx so far, it seems really powerful, but it seems to like couple your app dev to itself, right? Like, so if you pick Htmx as an approach, you're kind of locked in, and it's going to be hard to like unpatch things and change the like underlying architecture of how you're kind of writing this code, right?
Yes, to some extent, I agree. That's definitely an option in the future, maybe of extending HTMXer even more, such that the library will see, well, you have enabled HTMX, but you're just writing standard Blazor stuff. I will try to generate the right HTMX attributes for you. And then if you don't want to do that anymore, you can, basically fully real render mode, as the Apache Gaming commented here, right? So that could be something, but I do think that that's probably going to be a bunch of, like, it would be the lowest common denominator of the two to get them to work together. So I think you will lose some, and I don't think it's going to be valuable, honestly. So yeah, it is something where you have to go in and add those additional attributes. You could turn around and say, well, if you want to go back and not have HTMX anymore, you want to go back to standard Blazor, or maybe go Blazor Server or Blazor WebAssembly. And that's another thing that's still lying on the floor, is also maybe having that auto mode work, right? So you have HTMX for some pages, and then you have fully WebAssembly, anything goes for other components. I haven't actually tested, but I assume it's not going to be working at all, because I pulled out all the things and so only put back the things I needed to get stuff working, right? So there's definitely some things there. I do think that if you want to use HTMX, you have a lot of value. So I'm not going to say that I think it would be a strategic decision to say, well, we're going to leverage this. And what we have here, what I've shown you here, it's not production ready by any stretch of the imagination. If you want to try HTMX out in Anchor, you probably want to go with Khalid's and Razor Pages. His library's been around for, there's a plus 100,000 downloads, so it's definitely something that you would want to lean into. That
was one of the questions. How does this compare to Khalid's library?
So Khalid's is leveraging MVC and Razor Pages. So it extends that. And I was asking around the Discord for Htmx, and there's a .NET channel in there, and asking people, well, what is the advantages of Blazor versus Razor Pages, or Blazor components versus Razor Pages? And it is, I have very little experience with Razor Pages, so I can't really say for certain myself, but the general consensus is that the Blazor component model is nicer to work with, even if we're lacking tag helpers. So people prefer, if they can, they prefer to use Blazor components instead of Razor Pages. So I think that's the reasoning why you would want to keep going in this direction. And there's other libraries like Risi, which I also mentioned in my slide deck, that is a bit further ahead in terms of supporting Blazor components. But there you would have to go and define your Blazor endpoints or define custom minimal API endpoints that will then do the routing for you. So yeah, I do see some. I do definitely see some value in this, but it's not ready by any stretch of the imagination yet, and I would love for people to come and help out and contribute.
Awesome.
So yeah.
And we got another question here. So does HTMX work with web components? They're using Fluent UI Blazor components right now.
Yeah. So it works really well with web components. Probably not the Blazor versions, but web components are just HTML markup. So you would include a bit of JavaScript that enables those web components to work. But as you saw, I'm integrating nicely with Bootstrap here. Web components are just any other element, and HTMX doesn't care about that.
Right.
So it's without any problem.
And we had this other question about Blazor Smart Components. So that's the one that you said you wouldn't integrate well.
No. So smart components are a different thing. They will probably work fine, I think, with HTMX as well. But no, I was talking about the Blazor Fluent UI components.
Oh, okay.
So there's a library from the Fluent UI guys that basically exposes those through Blazor components. I haven't tried, but I think there might be things that don't work well. It could probably be made to work well, but you would probably just go one step lower and just use the web components directly from Fluent UI, and they would work fine because they're just markup at the end of the day, and Blazor is quite good at spitting those out, and HTMX will work happily with them.
Awesome. I love that I'm always learning in these shows. I haven't used HTMX before, so thank you for coming on the show. I want to invite people that are watching as well. If you're working on some nice project, you want to be on the show, you can sign up to be one of our special guests, like Egil here. Go to aka.ms/onnetlive-guest. And with that, I think we're reaching the end of our show, unless we have something else.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything else. So I just wanted to thank you, Egil, for this. This has been awesome. I learned a lot about HTMX myself now, and I'm sure our guests and viewers have as well. So thank you. And thank you for everyone watching on .NET Live. Check out other great on .NET Live TV streams and videos at .net/live, and tune in next week when we're joined by a special guest, Deb, who's going to share some insights with ML.NET and Intel, which is going to be quite interesting. So I'm looking forward to that one as well. Thank you, everyone. Until next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.